Okay, folks, I'm not getting any audio. What's going on? Oh, my mic! My mic! Is it on? Can you hear me? Audio coming in. Testing. Theoretically, the Reading Kaufman of the World is now live and recording. We're going to do a little run through here to warm back up to the history of the world according to Louis Ginsburg. But first, we're gonna just have a look at the back. We're on chapter 5 of the Legends of the Jews with the Reading Kaufman of the World, bedtime stories thing in outer space that this is. So, but we're starting the chapter on Abraham, so we're gonna do a little background here. Abram, is the common patriarch of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and other religions, in case you didn't know it. In Judaism, he is the founding father of the covenant of the pieces, the special relationship between the Hebrews and God. In Christianity, he's the prototype of all believers, Jewish or Gentile. And in Islam, he is seen as a link in the chain of prophets that begins with Adam and culminates in Muhammad. The narrative in the book of Genesis revolves around the themes of posterity and land. Abraham is called by God to leave the house of his father Terah and settle in the land originally given to Canaan, but which God now promises to Abraham and his progeny. Various candidates are put forward who might inherit the land after Abraham, and while the promises are made to Ishmael about the founding a great nation, Isaac, Abraham's son by his half sister Sarah, inherits God's promises to Abraham. Abraham purchases a tomb, the cave of the patriarchs at Hebron, to be Sarah's grave, thus establishing his right to the land. And in the second generation, his heir, Isaac, is married to a woman from his own kin, thus ruling the Canaanites out of any inheritance. That's how they did it. That's how they worked it. Abraham later marries Keturah and has 6 more sons, but on his death, when he is buried beside Sarah, it is Isaac who receives all Abraham's goods, while the other sons receive only gifts. The Abraham story cannot be definitively related to any specific time, and it is widely agreed that the patriarchal age, along with the Exodus and the period of the Judges, is a late literary construct that does not relate to any period in actual history. Just keep that in mind. A common hypothesis among scholars is that it was composed in the early Persian period, late 6th century before the Common Era, as a result of tensions between Jewish landowners who had stayed in Judah during the Babylonian captivity and traced their right to the land through their father Abraham and the returning exiles who based their counterclaim on Moses and the Exodus tradition. Okay, now we're going to get to the real meat of the article here. The biblical account. We have a painting of Abraham's journey from Ur to Canaan by Joseph Molnar, 1850, Hungarian National Gallery, Budapest. Isn't it beautiful? Ah. Terah, the ninth in descent from Noah, was the father of 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. The entire family, including grandchildren, lived in Ur of the Chaldees. According to a midrash, Abram worked in Terah's idol shop in his youth. Haran was the father of Lot, and thus Lot was Abram's nephew. Haran died in his native city, Ur of the Chaldees. Abram married Sarah, who was barren. Terah, with Abram, Sarai, and Lot, then departed for Canaan, but settled in a place named Haran, or something like that, where Terah died at the age of 205. God had told Abram to leave his country and kindred to go to a land that he would show him, and promised to make him a great nation, bless him, make his name great, bless them that bless him, and curse them who may curse him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Aaron and his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and the substance and souls that they had acquired, and traveled to Shechem in Canaan. Here's a painting of Abraham's counsel to Sarah, watercolor by James Tissot in 1900 in the Jewish Museum in New York. There was a severe famine in the land of Canaan, so that Abram and Lot and their households traveled to Egypt. On the way, Abram told Sarah to say that she was his sister, so that the Egyptians would not kill him. When they entered Egypt, the Pharaoh's officials praised Sarah's beauty to Pharaoh, and they took her into the palace and gave Abram goods in exchange. God afflicted Pharaoh and his household with plagues, which led the Pharaoh to find out what was wrong. Upon discovering that Sarah was a married woman, Pharaoh demanded that Abram and Sarah leave. Abram and Lot separate. Main article: Abraham and Lot's conflict. They had a conflict, folks. When they came back to the Bethel and Hai area, Abram and Lot's sizable herds occupied the same pastures. This became a problem for the herdsmen, who were assigned to each family's cattle. The conflicts between herdsmen had become so troublesome that Abram suggested that Lot choose a separate area, either on the left hand or on the right hand, that there be no conflict amongst brethren. Lot chose to go eastward to the plain of Jordan, where the land was well watered everywhere as far as Zoar, and he dwelled in the cities of the plain towards Sodom. Abram went south to Hebron and settled in the plain of Mamre, where he built another altar to worship God. Chedorlaomer, Chedoleum, Chedorlaomer, Chedolar. The Battle of Siddim. Okay, we have a painting here, the meeting of Abraham and Melchizedek, canvas Dierk Boutz the Elder, 1464-1467, circa. During the rebellion of the Jordan River cities against Elam, Abraham's nephew Lot was taken prisoner along with his entire household by the invading Elamite forces. The Elamite army came to collect the spoils of war, having just defeated the king of Sodom's armies. Lot and his family at the time were settled on the outskirts of the kingdom of Sodom, which made them a visible target. One person who escaped capture came and told Abram, what happened. Once Abram received this news, he immediately assembled 318 trained servants. Abram's force headed north in pursuit of the Elamite army, who were already worn down from the battle of Siddim. When they caught up with them at Dan, Abram devised a battle plan by splitting his group into more than one unit and launched a night raid. Not only were they able to free the captives, Abram's unit chased and slaughtered the Elamite king Chedorlaomer at Hobah, just north of Damascus. They freed Lot, as well as his household and possessions, and recovered all the goods from Sodom that had been taken. Upon Abram's return, Sodom's king came out to meet him in the valley of Shave, Shabu, Shava, the king's dale, also Melchizedek, king of Salem, Jerusalem, a priest of God Most High, brought out bread and wine and blessed Abram and God. Abram then gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. The king of Sodom then offered to let Abram keep all the possessions if he would merely return his people. Abram refused any deal from the king of Sodom, other than the share to which his allies were entitled. Here we have the vision of the Lord directing Abraham to count the stars, woodcut by Julius Schnorr von Karlsfeld, from an 1860 Bible in Pictures edition. See also the covenant of the pieces. The voice of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. and repeated the promise of the land and the descendants as numerous as the stars. Abram and God made a covenant ceremony, and God told of the future bondage of Israel in Egypt. God described to Abram the land that his offspring would claim, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaims, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. Hagar. See also Hagar and Islam. We have a painting of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, imagined here in a Bible illustration from 1897. Abram and Sarai tried to make sense of how he would become a progenitor of nations, because after 10 years of living in Canaan, no child had been born. Sarah then offered her Egyptian handmaiden Hagar to Abram with the intention that she should bear him a son. After Hagar found she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress Sarah. Sarah responded by mistreating Hagar, and Hagar fled into the wilderness. An angel spoke with Hagar at the fountain on the way to Shur. He instructed her to return to the camp of Abram, and that her son would be a wild ass of a man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the face of all his brethren. She was told to call her son Ishmael. Hagar then called God, who spoke to her, El Roy, El Ra, El Roy. Thou, God, seest me. KJV, that's the King James Version. From that day onward, the well was called Bir Lahai Roy, Ra, 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 however you say that. The well of him that liveth and seeth me. King James Version, margin. She then did as she was instructed by returning to her mistress in order to have her child. Abram was 86 years of age when Ishmael was born. Sarah. 13 years later, when Abram was 99 years of age, God declared Abram's new name Abraham, a father of many nations. Abraham then received instructions for the covenant, of which circumcision was to be the sign. That's how it all started. Snip, snip. God declared Sarah's new name Sarah, blessed her, and told Abraham, I will give thee a son also of her. Abraham laughed and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, that is 90 years old, bear? Immediately after Abraham's encounter with God, he had his entire household of men, including himself, age 99, and Ishmael, age 13, circumcised. 3 visitors. Abraham and the Three Angels, watercolor by James Tissot, 1896, circa 1896 to 1902. Main article, Abraham serving the three angels. Not long afterward, during the heat of the day, Abraham had been sitting at the entrance of his tent by the terebinths of Mamre. He looked up and saw 3 men in the presence of God. Then he ran and bowed to the ground to welcome them. Abraham then offered to wash their feet and fetch them a morsel of bread, to which they assented. Abraham rushed to Sarah's tent and to order cakes made from choice flour. Then he ordered a servant boy to prepare a choice calf. When all was prepared, he set curd's milk and the calf before them, waiting on them under a tree as they ate. One of the visitors told Abraham that upon his return next year, Sarah would have a son. While at the tent entrance, Sarah overheard what was said, and she laughed to herself about the prospect of having a child at their ages. The visitor inquired of Abraham why Sarah laughed at bearing a child at her age, as nothing is too hard for God. Frightened, Sarah denied laughing. Abraham's plea. Main article, Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot. Biblical person. Ooh, here's the painting. Abraham sees Sodom in flames. Watercolor by James Tissot, circa 1896 to 1902. After eating, Abraham and the three visitors got up. They walked over to the peak that overlooked the cities of the plain to discuss the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah, for their detestable sins that were so great moved God to action. Because Abraham's nephew was living in Sodom, God revealed plans to confirm and judge these cities. At this point, the 2 other visitors left for Sodom. Then Abraham turned to God and pleaded decrementally with him, from 50 persons to less, that if there were at least 10 righteous men found in the city, would not God spare the city for the sake of 10 righteous people? God declared that he would not destroy the city. When the two visitors got to Sodom to conduct their report, they planned on staying in the city square. However, Abraham's nephew Lot met with them and strongly insisted that these two men stay at his house for the night. A rally of men stood outside of Lot's home and demanded that Lot bring out his guests so that they may know them. However, Lot objected and offered his virgin daughters, who had not known man, to the rally of men instead. They rejected that notion and sought to break down Lot's door to get to his male guests. They were horny, thus confirming the wickedness of the city and portending their imminent destruction. Early the next morning, Abraham went to the place where he stood before God. He looked out towards Sodom and Gomorrah and saw what became of the cities of the plain, where not even 10 righteous had been found, as the smoke of the land went up as the smoke of a furnace. Abimelech. Oh, look at the painting. Oop. The Caravan of Abraham, watercolor by James Tissot before 1903, Jewish Museum, New York. See also endogamy and wife-sister narratives in the book of Genesis. Abraham settled between Kadesh and Shur in the land of the Philistines. While he was living in Gerar, Abraham openly claimed that Sarah was his sister. Upon discovering the news, King Abimelech had her brought to him. God then came to Abimelech in a dream and declared that taking her would result in death because she was a man's wife. Abimelech had not laid hands on her, so he inquired if he would also slay a righteous nation, especially since Abraham had claimed that he and Sarah were siblings. In response, God told Abimelech that he did indeed have a blameless heart, and that is why he continued to exist. However, should he not return the wife of Abraham back to him, God would surely destroy Abimelech and his entire household. Abimelech was informed that Abraham was a prophet who would pray for him. Early next morning, Abimelech informed his servants of his dream and approached Abraham, inquiring as to why he had brought such great guilt upon his kingdom. Abraham stated that he thought there was no fear of God in that place, and that they might kill him for his wife. Then Abraham defended what he had said as not being a lie at all. And yet, indeed, she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. Abimelech returned Sarah to Abraham and gave him gifts of sheep, oxen, and servants, and invited him to settle wherever he pleased in Abimelech's lands. Further, Abimelech gave Abraham 1,000 pieces of silver to serve as Sarah's vindication before all. Abraham then prayed for Abimelech and his household, since God had stricken the women with infertility because of the taking of Sarah. After living for some time in the land of the Philistines, Abimelech and Phicol, the chief of his troops, approached Abraham because of a dispute that resulted in a violent confrontation at a well. Abraham then approached Abimelech due to his Philistine servants' aggressive attacks and the seizing of Abraham's well. Abimelech claimed ignorance of the incident. Then Abraham offered a pact by providing sheep and oxen to Abimelech. Further, to attest that Abraham was the one who dug the well, he also gave Abimelech 7 ewes for proof. These animals prove it that I dug the well. They, that's the proof. Believe it or don't. Um, because of this sworn oath, they called the place of this well Beersheba, after Abimelech and Phicol headed back to Philistia. Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba and called upon the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. Oh, Isaac. Oh, look at this beautiful illuminated manuscript. Abraham is going to sacrifice Isaac. You see, he's holding him by the hair. There, and the angels saying, "Hey, hold on a minute. Don't, yeah, stop." Uh, uh, this is from an East Anglian missal, circa 1315. National Library of Wales, Aberystwyth, whatever. Okay. Doom. The Sacrifice of Isaac by Caravaggio. Whoa, Caravaggio. Oh. Circa 1603, Uffizi, Florence. As had been prophesied in Mamre the previous year, Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham. On the first anniversary of the covenant of circumcision, Abraham was 100 years old when his son, whom he named Isaac, was born, and he circumcised him when he was 8 days old. For Sarah, the thought of giving birth and nursing a child at such an old age also brought her much laughter, as she declared, God had made me to laugh, so that all who hear will laugh with me. Isaac continued to grow, and on the day he was weaned, Abraham had a feast to honor the occasion. During the celebration, however, Sarah found Ishmael mocking, an observation that would begin to clarify the birthright of Isaac. Ishmael. See also Ishmael in Islam and the sacrifice. Ishmael was 14 years old when Abraham's son Isaac was born to Sarah. When she found Ishmael teasing Isaac, Sarah told Abraham to send both Ishmael and Hagar away. She declared that Ishmael would not share in Isaac's inheritance. Abraham was greatly distressed by his wife's words and sought the advice of his God. God told Abraham not to be distressed, but to do as his wife commanded. God reassured Abraham that in Isaac shall seed be called to thee. He also said that Ishmael would make a nation, because he is thy seed. Early the next morning, Abraham brought Hagar and Ishmael out together. He gave her bread and water and sent them away. The two wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba until her bottle of water was completely consumed. In a moment of despair, she burst into tears after God heard the boy's voice. An angel of the Lord confirmed to Hagar that he would become a great nation and would be living on his sword. I'm going to be living on my sword. A well of water then appeared, bing, so that it saved their lives. As the boy grew, he became a skilled archer, living in the wilderness of Paran. Eventually, his mother found a wife for Ishmael from her home country, the land of Egypt. The binding of Isaac. The angel hinders the offering of Isaac by Rembrandt, 1635, Hermitage Museum, St. Petersburg. Main article, The Binding of Isaac. At some point in Isaac's youth, Abraham was commanded by God to offer his son as a sacrifice in the land of Moriah. They call the wind Moriah. The patriarch traveled 3 days until he came to the mount that God told him of. He then commanded the servants to remain while he and Isaac proceeded alone into the mount. Isaac carried the wood upon which he would be sacrificed. Along the way, Isaac asked his father where the animal for the burnt offering was, to which Abraham replied, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. Just as Abraham was about to sacrifice his son, he was interrupted by the angel of the Lord, and he saw behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns, which he sacrificed instead of his son. For his obedience, he received another promise of numerous descendants and abundant prosperity. After this event, Abraham went to Beersheba. Later years. See also Abraham's family tree. Sarah died, and Abraham buried her in the cave of the patriarchs, the cave of Machpelah, near Hebron, where he had purchased, along with the adjoining field from Ephron the Hittite. After the death of Sarah, Abraham took another wife, a concubine named Keturah, by whom he had 6 sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Shua thing. According to the Bible, reflecting the change of his name to Abraham, meaning a father of many nations, Abraham is considered to be the progenitor of many nations mentioned in the Bible, among others, the Israelites, Ishmaelites, the Edomites, the Amalekites. Uh, did you catch that one, folks? Abraham is the progenitor of the Amalekites. Kenizzites, Midianites, and Assyrians. And though his nephew Lot, and through his nephew Lot, he was also related to the Moabites and Ammonites. Abraham lived to see his son marry Rebekah and to see the birth of his twin grandsons Jacob and Esau. He was buried in the cave of Machpelah by his sons Isaac and Ishmael. Historicity and origins. Here's Abraham's well at Beersheba. There it is, folks. The well. In the early and middle 20th century, leading archaeologists such as William F. Albright and biblical scholars such as Albrecht Alt believed that the patriarchs and matriarchs were either real individuals or believable composites of people who lived in the patriarchal age, the second millennium before the Common Era. But in the 1970s, new arguments concerning Israel's past in the biblical text challenged these views. These arguments can be found in Thomas L. Thompson's The Historicity of the Patriarchal Narratives in 1974 and John Van Cedar's Abraham in History and Tradition 1975. Thompson, a literary scholar, based his argument on archaeology and ancient texts. His thesis centered on the lack of compelling evidence that the patriarchs lived in the second millennium BCE, and noted how certain biblical texts reflected first millennium conditions and concerns. Van Cedars examined the patriarchal stories and argued that their names, social milieu, and messages strongly suggested that they were Iron Age creations. By the beginning of the 21st century, archaeologists had given up hope of recovering any context that would make Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob into credible historical figures. Okay, they gave up, folks. Uh, the origins of the narrative. Abraham's name is apparently very ancient, as the tradition found in Genesis no longer understands its original meaning. Probably, father is exalted. The meaning offered in Genesis, father of a multitude, is a popular etymology. The story, like those of the other patriarchs, most likely had a substantial oral prehistory. At some stage, the oral traditions became part of the written tradition of the Pentateuch. A majority of scholars believe that this stage belongs to the Persian period, roughly 520 to 320 before the Common Era. The mechanisms by which this came about remain unknown, but there are currently two important hypotheses. The first, called Persian imperial authorization, is that the post-exilic community devised the Torah as a legal basis on which to function within the Persian imperial system. The second is that the Pentateuch was written to provide the criteria for determining who would belong to the post-exilic Jewish community and to establish the power structures and relative positions of its various groups, notably the priesthood and the lay elders. Nevertheless, the completion of the Torah and its elevation to the center of post-exilic Judaism was as much or more about combining older texts as writing new ones. The final Pentateuch was based on existing traditions. In Ezekiel 33:24, written during the exile in the first half of the 6th century before the Common Era, Ezekiel, in exile in Babylon, tells how those who remained in Judah are claiming ownership of the land based on inheritance from Abraham. But the prophet tells them they have no claim because they do not observe the Torah. Isaiah 63:16 similarly testifies of the tension between the people of Judah and the returning post-exilic Jews, the Gola, stating that God is the father of Israel and that Israel's history begins with the Exodus and not with Abraham. The conclusion can be to be inferred from this and similar evidence, Ezra and Nehemiah, is that the figure of Abraham must have been preeminent among the great landowners of Judah at the time of the exile and after, serving to support their claims to the land in opposition to those of the returning exiles. Property, folks. Religious traditions. Abraham. Here's Abraham and the angels. Isn't that beautiful? The Gelder. circa 1680 to 85, Museum Boijmans van Wingingen, Rotterdam. Abraham is the first patriarch. He's venerated in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i faith. His feast is on the 9th of October in Roman Catholicism. Abraham is given a high position of respect in three major world faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In Judaism, he is the founding father of the covenant, the special relationship between the Jewish people and God, leading to the belief that the Jews are the chosen people of God. In Christianity, the Apostle Paul taught that Abraham's faith in God preceding the Mosaic law made him the prototype of all believers, circumcised and uncircumcised. In Islam, the Prophet Muhammad claimed Abraham, whose submission to God constituted Islam, was a believer before the fact and undercut Jewish claims to an exclusive relationship with God in the covenant. Judaism. In Jewish tradition, Abraham is called Avraham Avinu, our father Abraham, signifying that he was both the biological progenitor of the Jews and the father of Judaism, the first Jew. His story is read in the weekly Torah reading portions, predominantly in the Parashat Lekah, Vayera, Chaye, Sarah, and Toledot. In Jewish legend, God created heaven and earth for the sake of the merits of Abraham. After the deluge, Abraham was the only one among the pious who solemnly swear never forsaking God, and studied in the house of Noah and Shem to learn about ways of God. And continuing the line of high priests from Noah and Shem, then he descended the office to Levi and his seed forever. Before leaving his father's land, Abraham was miraculously saved from the fiery furnace of Nimrod. Nimrod, another guy that they don't, yeah, it doesn't seem to have ever existed. Following his brave action of breaking the idols of the Chaldeans into pieces, during his sojourning in Canaan, Abraham was accustomed to extend hospitality to travelers and strangers and taught how to praise God. Also, knowledge of God to those who had received his kindness. Besides Isaac and Jacob, he is the one whose name would appear united with God, as God in Judaism was called Elohe Abraham, Elohe Yitzhak, Ve Elohe Yaakov, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, and never the God of anyone else, folks. He was also mentioned as the father of 30 nations. Abraham is generally credited as the author of the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, one of the earliest extant books on Jewish mysticism. Christianity. Abraham does not loom so large in Christianity as he does in Judaism and Islam. It is Jesus as the Jewish Messiah who is central to Christianity, and the idea of a divine Messiah is what separates Christianity from the other two religions. In Romans, Abraham's merit is less his obedience to the divine will than his faith in God's ultimate grace. This faith provides him the merit for God having chosen him for the covenant, and the covenant becomes one faith, not obedience. The Roman Catholic Church calls Abraham our Father in faith, and the Eucharistic prayer of the Roman canon recited during the Mass, see Abraham in the Catholic liturgy. He is also commemorated in the calendars of saints of several denominations. On the 20th of August by the Maronite Church, 28th of August in the Coptic Church, and the Assyrian Church of the East, with the full office for the latter, and on the 9th of October by the Roman Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. In the introduction to his 15th century translation of the Golden Legends account of Abraham, William Caxton noted that this patriarch's life was read in church on Quinquagesima Sunday. Quinquagesima. Quinquagesima Sunday. He is the patron saint of those in the hospitality industry. So when you're working in the hotel room service, he's going to be looking after you. Got to burn a candle for him. Uh, the Eastern Orthodox Church commemorates him as the righteous forefather Abraham with 2 feast days in its liturgical calendar. The first time is on the 9th of October for those churches which follow the traditional Julian calendar. 9th October falls on 22nd October of the modern Gregorian calendar, where he is commemorated together with his nephew, righteous Lot. The other is on the Sunday of Forefathers, 2 Sundays before Christmas, when he is commemorated together with other ancestors of Jesus. Abraham is also mentioned in the divine liturgy of Saint Basil the Great, just before the anaphora, and Abraham and Sarah are invoked in the prayers said by the priest over a newly married couple. Islam. The main article is Abraham and Islam. Islam regards Abraham as a link in the chain of prophets that begins with Adam and culminates in Muhammad. Ibrahim is mentioned in 35 chapters of the Quran, more often than any other biblical personage apart from Moses. He is called both a Hanif, monotheist, and Muslim, one who submits. And Muslims regard him as a prophet and patriarch, the archetype of the perfect Muslim and the revered reformer of the Kaaba in Mecca. Islamic traditions consider Abraham, the first pioneer of Islam, which is also called Millat Ibrahim, the religion of Abraham, and that his purpose and mission throughout his life was to proclaim the oneness of God. In Islam, Abraham holds an exalted position among the major prophets, and he is referred to as Ibrahim Khalilullah, meaning Abraham, the beloved of Allah. Besides Ishaq and Yaqub, Ibrahim is among the most honorable and most excellent men in sight of God. Ibrahim was also mentioned in Quran as the father of Muslims and the role model for the community. In the arts, painting and sculpture. This is the part I like. You know, I like beautiful paintings. I used to paint. Paintings on the life of Abraham tend to focus on only a few incidents: the sacrifice of Isaac, meeting Melchizedek, entertaining the three angels, Hagar in the desert, and a few others. Additionally, Martin O'Kane, a professor of biblical studies, writes that the parable of Lazarus resting in the bosom of Abraham, as described in the Gospel of Luke, became an iconic image in Christian works. According to O'Kane, artists often chose to divert from the common literary portrayal of Lazarus sitting next to Abraham at a banquet in heaven, and instead focus on the somewhat incongruous notion of Abraham, the most venerated of patriarchs, holding a naked and vulnerable child in his bosom. Several artists have been inspired by the life of Abraham, including Albrecht Dürer, 1471 to 1528, Caravaggio, 1573 to 1610, Donatello, Raphael, Philip van Dyck, Dutch painter, 1680 to 1753, and Claude Lorrain, French painter, 1600 to 1682. Rembrandt, Dutch, 1606 to 1669, created at least 7 works on Abraham. Peter Paul Rubens, 1577 to 1640, did several. Marc Chagall did at least 5 on Abraham. Gustave Doré, French illustrator, 1832 to 1833, did 6. And James Tissot, French painter and illustrator, 1836 to 1902, did over 20 works on Abraham, the subject of Abraham. Here's a 16th century plaster cast of a late Roman era sacrifice of Isaac. The hand of God originally came down to restrain Abraham's knife. Both are now missing. The sarcophagus of Junius Bassus depicts a set of biblical stories, including Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac. These sculpted scenes are on the outside of a marble early Christian sarcophagus used for the burial of Junius Bassus. He died in 359. This sarcophagus has been described as probably the single most famous piece of early Christian relief sculpture. The sarcophagus was originally placed in or under Old St. Peter's Basilica. It was rediscovered in 1597 and is now below the modern basilica in the Museo Storico del Tesoro della Basilica di San Pietro. Blah, 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 blah. Museum of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. The base is approximately 4 by 8 by 4 feet. The Old Testament scenes depicted were chosen as precursors of Christ's sacrifice in the New Testament, in an early form of typology. Just to the right of the middle is Daniel in the lion's den. On the left is Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac. George Segal created figural sculptures by molding plastered gauze strips over live models in his 1987 work, Abraham's Farewell to Ishmael. The human condition was central to his concerns, and Segal used the Old Testament as a source for his imagery. This sculpture depicts the dilemma faced by Abraham when Sarah demanded that he expel Hagar and Ishmael. In the sculpture, the father's tenderness, Sarah's rage, and Hagar's resigned acceptance portray a range of human emotions. The sculpture was donated to the Miami Art Museum after the artist's death in 2000. Christian iconography. Usually, Abraham can be identified by the context of the image, the meeting of Melchizedek, the three visitors, or the sacrifice of Isaac. In solo portraits, a sword or knife may be used as an attribute, as in this statue by Maria Morlater, or this painting by Lorenzo Monaco. He always wears a gray or white beard. As early as the beginning of the 3rd century, Christian art followed Christian typology in making the sacrifice of Isaac a foreshadowing of Christ's sacrifice on the cross and its memorial in the sacrifice of the Mass. See, for example, this 11th century Christian altar, engraved with Abraham's and other sacrifices taken to prefigure that of Christ in the Eucharist. Wow, bet you didn't know that. Some early Christian writers interpreted the three visitors as the triune God. Thus, in Santa Maria Maggiore, Rome, a 5th century mosaic portrays only the visitors against a gold ground and puts semi-transparent copies of them in the heavenly space above the scene. In Eastern Orthodox art, the visit is the chief means by which the Trinity is pictured. For example, some images do not include Abraham and Sarah, like Andrei Rublev's Trinity, which shows only the three visitors. As beardless youths at a table. Literature. Fear and Trembling, original Danish title Frygt og Beven, is an influential philosophical work by Soren Kierkegaard, published in 1843 under the pseudonym Johannes de Silentio, John the Silent. Kierkegaard wanted to understand the anxiety that must have been present in Abraham when God asked him to sacrifice his son. Music. In 1681, Marc-Antoine Charpentier released the dramatic motet Sacrificium Abrahae H402-402A-402B for soloist chorus, doubling instruments, and B.C. Sebastian de Brosser released the cantata Abraham Date Unknown. In 1994, Steve Reich released an opera named The Cave. The title refers to the Cave of the Patriarchs. The narrative of the opera is based on the story of Abraham and his immediate family as it is recounted in the various religious texts, and as it is understood by individual people from different cultures and religious traditions. Bob Dylan's Highway 61 Revisited is the title track for his 1965 album Highway 61 Revisited. In 2004, Rolling Stone magazine ranked the song as number 364 on their 500 greatest songs of all time. The song has 5 stanzas. In each stanza, someone describes an unusual problem that is ultimately resolved on Highway 61. In stanza 1, God tells Abraham, "Kill me a son." God wants the killing done on Highway 61. Abram, the original name of the biblical Abraham, is also the name of Dylan's own father. There you go, folks. Now you know more about Abraham than the average joker. You know more about him than Donald Trump. Thanks to the Reading Cow, Friend of the World, bringing you the glorious, inimitable, legendary truth of the history of the universe as it happened according to stuff that people wrote, that other people read. And thanks Until next time, tune in and we'll see you then. Goodbye.